podcast,
Yeah,
like,
exactly. You're at home and you're chilling, and then you can just like talk to friends, I guess.
yeah. Well, I mean, this is such an interesting setup considering we haven't actually officially met,
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
now we're gonna get to have this like big chat and have it recorded, and
Yeah, man.
this is for 20 of us, like it's peak 2020.
Yeah, 100%. I think there's definitely like a need for people, and actually a want. Like people really do want to hear like all kinds of different voices. And given that, I think it's a great opportunity for everyone to just put out great conversations and see how different people live and how different people think. I think that's awesome.
So is that kind of the idea behind your platform? What you're doing here?
Yeah, mostly that. I think. I mean, since we're going to speak about it, if like through this conversation, like one thing which really motivated why I'm doing this is because I think as a culture we've lost what it means to have a civilized conversation from opposing
Mhm.
perspectives. Like you might have a different perspective than I do, but that does not mean that we cannot talk about it, and it does not mean that I can't learn from you. And I think that's super huge.
So well said. I mean, we live in this age of like cancel culture and like, calling out.
Yeah,
And, I think there's value in shutting down very problematic conversations that incite violence, for example. But if it gets to the point where we can't talk,
yeah,
learn from each other, then everyone's just off in their own little echo chambers, not progressing anything in any particular direction.
yeah, man.
Yeah, you're saying.
It's a whole bunch of different things, and I mean, one thing which may be a little bit relevant to your industry is just the whole. Um, well, there was rainbow marketing. That the whole phrase of rainbow marketing.
In India specifically, or just like
No,
generally, like trying to cash in on
I think
the
in
dollar?
I think in the States, and now it's there in India as well. I think there's a little bit of rainbow marketing, but because it's not in the mainstream yet, I haven't seen it much in India. But just that whole thing now with the whole Black Lives Matter movement, where people like for example Nike is like posting about the Black Lives Matter movement, and these organizations don't seem to be doing much to actually help people of color. And is that something that you've experienced in the cosmetics and beauty industry as well?
Most definitely, yeah. It's a huge, huge part of it. So we can get into that
For sure.
Yeah. So let me just ask: are you already recording?
Yeah.
Or is this like we're just?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, I should have let you know, but I just started. Sorry about that.
That's okay. Do you have like a formal intro that you do? Do you edit this, or like how does
So
this
yeah,
kind of
so
work?
just to let you know, I don't usually edit it unless you ask, and I let the whole conversation go on freeform, and I don't provide an intro just because I would rather someone listen to the conversation. I could put an intro, like if you have a text that you want me to put, I could do that right at the bottom. Right?
Yeah, like I'm pretty easy.
Yeah.
I guess people will get to know me, get to know you as they view or listen to this. So yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, it's funny. Like we know each other through our common friend Davey, but like I haven't actually officially met you yet. I mean, this is how I'm meeting you. So was there like, do you kind of try to do, because it's sort of like an interview setup? Right. Is it more that you have questions for me, or is it weird if I ask you about yourself?
Yeah, we're just talking, man. If you want to ask, go for it. So yeah.
Yeah, well, I do. Like, how did you meet Devi? Like, I assume you knew each other from Boston.
Yeah, I think I met Devi in the weirdest way. I met her at a bar. I met her at a bar, and so when I'm at a bar, I talk shit. Exactly. Like that's my general approach. I was just talking shit, and she introduced herself as Devi Gianetti. But I could have sworn that she's Gujarati. Like I could have sworn. I was like, holy shit! How's your last name Italian? And how do you look like you're from Gujarat? And then she's like, holy shit! Nobody's ever said that I look Gujarati.
You picked it.
Yeah, and then we started talking. We started talking. Like she's actually a pretty fun person to hang out with, and she's got this amazing quality of bringing people together.
Oh my God, absolutely. It's a skill really, and how she does it so beautifully, like without it being like there's no agenda
Yeah.
there. She's just one of those people, like she's a people person and she knows how to bring people together. And I mean, I am so lucky I met Devi, because honestly, before Devi, I didn't really have friends in Bombay in the entertainment circles, you
Yeah.
know. And through her, I've met many, many people. I've met you now,
Yeah.
and it's been really helpful because I was a stranger in Bombay. I didn't know people there, and now I have a whole community, and I have Devi to thank for it. Quite honestly.
So, did you move to Bombay to or acting? Or?
I moved to Bombay actually. Like my background was in makeup artistry, so I was working as a makeup artist. Like I started my whole makeup artistry journey here in Australia, even though I'm from Canada.
Right.
And then I left Australia, moved back to Canada. I was working with a number of brands in Canada, and I started a beauty blog, which I think you maybe checked out the website. And because there's this element of travel in what I do, it's like beauty nomad, because like I'm nomad. I've kind of grown up all over the world. I spend a lot of time in different countries. I was working on some documentaries in different countries. Like I spent time living in Cuba and then in Serbia. Like I was working on a number of like these small documentary projects. I was like, okay, let me just kind of bring this together with my makeup background.
Right.
And then it sort of seemed like a logical conclusion to go back to like the motherland. Like I'm like, let me go to India and see what's going on in the makeup industry, in the beauty blogging space.
Right.
And so that's actually brought me to Bombay. I got there in 2018. And the first thing I did was I started reaching out to agencies saying, hey, like I'm a makeup artist and beauty blogger. Like I'm looking for influencer work.
Yeah.
Like, you know, that's the space I'm operating in. But then this is like the most Bombay story ever. Like it very quickly turned into, oh, like, okay, but like like, have you done makeup on yourself? Like, have you done modeling work? And I had in the past.
Right.
So they started picking me more as a model and as a talent more than just a makeup artist.
Oh, that's awesome.
I think, yeah, it was great. Like it kind of, I was a bit stunned by it, but like I did end up signing up as like an influencer for a major makeup brand in India called My Glam. So I do a number of like videos for them, tutorials, like I'm a makeup expert for them. But outside of that, I think my agency got me into modeling gigs pretty much right away. Like I did a few TV commercials, like catalogs, like that kind of thing. And then 3 months later, I signed my movie.
Oh.
It was like warp speed. Yeah, it was. I think now, like almost 2 years later, I'm still sort of digesting everything that happened so fast.
That's crazy. So help me understand this, and also some of our viewers who I'm betting really don't have a very good idea of what or how much nuance is involved in makeup artistry.
Right. Well, makeup artistry is one of those things that I think like every like Indian immigrant kid, like, you know, you're a good student, right? Like you go to school, your parents, you know, you got to be on something. Oh my God, get out of the house. It's like everything has to be the best it can be. And I think I brought that approach to makeup artistry as well. So when I first started training, I realized this is a whole discipline that you have to learn about. And it's like a funny thing like cooking, because people will cook in their everyday lives and be like, I know everything about cooking. A lot of women do wear makeup. So, God, we're having monsoon. Sorry, like I don't know if you can hear that, but there's this huge storm here.
I can hear that, but that's all good, man. We're gonna edit that out.
Tell me if you need to put my mic up or something.
No, it's all fine.
But where I was going with that is that, you know, people will cook in their everyday lives, people will put makeup on in their everyday lives and think, you know, that's all there is to know about it. But once you start studying it as a discipline, you realize, no, this is like, there is so much involved. It is an art form. So it's like color theory. It's like understanding so many different skin tones, because you're not just doing makeup on yourself. You're doing makeup on other people. You know, you have to learn about different product ranges, what's available, what's not. So for a year before I was feeling confident enough in my makeup artistry skills I was already working on clients, but the more you do, the more you learn kind of thing.
Right. Yeah, guide me as I think through this, but it seems to me that like um, makeup is highly limited. And when I'm saying limited, I'm saying restricted by what we find biologically aesthetic. So, like for example, if someone has like if the makeup that you're putting on is too pink, for example, or if it doesn't match your skin tone, it kind of stands out. It's a little bit jarring,
Absolutely.
and it's kind of yeah. Go for it.
I was going to say that's why I think studying it and learning about it, that's where you start to learn that you can't, for example, like one of the basics of makeup is understanding somebody's skin tone.
Yeah.
So you can have a warm skin tone, you can have a cool undertone, or you can have an olive undertone. And based on those things, you will find products that complement or balance or correct colors in someone's skin in a specific way. So as like a really, really rough example, somebody who has a really warm skin tone, meaning like yellow, kind of a golden undertone. If you put a very cool tone pink lipstick on them,
yeah,
with a lot of undertone, it looks very jarring. It doesn't complement their skin. It'll look ashy on them. But if you find a warm tone pink, something that has a little bit more yellow in it, and put it on a person with a warm skin tone,
right,
it'll look a little nicer. So those are little things you start to pick up as you learn in this discipline. Calling it a discipline as if it's like some course,
but it is. Really, it definitely is.
People don't understand that it's a lot more complicated than at first glance. And I've learned to admire, and there's so many makeup artists out there that I respect so much because they can just look at someone and know what's going to work, and this isn't what's going to work. And
so were you surprised at all when you came to India and you found that we have as a culture an obsession for fair skin, like disproportionately so?
I wasn't surprised at all because I was born in New Delhi,
right?
And like even though I grew up outside of India, like I grew up in an Indian household, man. Like we consume Bollywood movies, we speak Hindi in my house, like you eat Indian food. So these are elements of Indian culture that follow you even as a member of the diaspora.
Right.
I grew up understanding these sort of, I don't know what to call it, problematic hierarchies when it comes to shadism within our Indian community.
Yeah.
Fair and Lovely is sold in Canada. It's sold here. Like you go to these desi grocery stores and people are looking for skin lightening products. And then, the inevitable question comes up as to why, And what I actually found really jarring was the way that these things are taken up outside of India versus in India. I think outside of India, these things aren't perfect, of course. Like people still consume these products, but there is a more nuanced conversation around why are we lightening up our skin? Like, why aren't we embracing our melanin? Like, brown is beautiful. Specifically in North America, because there's a sizable Black population that has a different discourse around this, not to homogenize every Black voice, but it's a different conversation. Whereas in India, I remember when I got there and, you see skin lightening creams everywhere. Even for me, like as a model, when I've gone on sets and stuff, they're like, oh, let's use a lighter foundation on you, or let's like lighten up in post-production. And I'm just like, what? Like that, what are we doing here? Like this is, it didn't surprise me. I knew that it was going to be a part of it, but what I did find surprising was the amount of resistance to having that conversation around it.
Yeah.
I feel
especially in your industry, which is acting. Like from all my friends who are like actors, I know that there are certain things in the industry, like if you step out of that norm, you usually get punished, like in terms of you stop getting work and you stop getting, people kind of people call this person a troublemaker, and they're like, if this individual is a troublemaker, I don't want to work with them, and things like that. That's pretty messed up. I had a conversation with a friend about just agencies and how agencies don't pay their actors in time, and that was a huge thing for him. Like he was waiting for a year on a payment that he deserved, and these individuals do not pay them. But did you know that Fair and Lovely now they've kind of removed the Fair and the Lovely? I don't know how it's going to work. What do you think about that?
I mean, I think that's, kind of going back to what we were just speaking about. Like, as I said, when I first arrived in India, I wasn't surprised to see that the amount of, worshipping of light skin that happens. We see it in our media, we see it in magazines, we see it all around us. And yet there was, even in 2018, like the brand that I started working with, there are conversations online where people were pushing back against this and saying, like, let's embrace darker skin tones. Let's celebrate that. We are a brown people, ultimately, like the deal. So I would see that conversation happening online, but not seeing it necessarily translate to on set or on the streets. But now here we are 2 years later, and I think BLM has absolutely sparked global conversations, not just around, police brutality, which is what this has, which is super important, of course, but it has extended to things like the beauty industry. And the translation that it's had in India is that Unilever, who has been selling this garbage for years, has gone, okay, we're having a very strong feedback from our customer base that this is something they don't like, or a sizable part of that customer base is saying, we don't like this, we're going to change the name, but they haven't changed the ingredients.
Yeah.
And, go from fair and lovely or whitening to just say glow, it's the same shit, different packaging.
Yeah.
So I don't really like something revolutionary, but it's a start. Right. This didn't happen 2 years ago. So I think there's been space created for this that wasn't previously there.
Yeah, I think also like, the issue is also like, fine, you're going to change the product packaging because of like a certain group of people that think it's wrong or think it's incorrect. I'm unsure as to how that's going to change the majority opinion towards that. And that's something which I like when I heard like them saying, I'm going to change the name. I was like, is that really going to change? Really, yeah. So
that's a very good point. And like the fact of the matter is, changing packaging or changing the name or just kind of doing this performative change of superficial saying, like, we hear you. Well, you hear a certain demographic, but then there's another demographic who still wants to consume these products and is still sort of the mindset that lighter is better. So for me, these sort of superficial changes that are happening, even in the beauty industry here in Australia, for example, I feel like it's a start, but it's not actually addressing the heart of the issue, which is, why do we have these mindsets in the first place? What does it say about our self-value, our self-esteem? Why are these hierarchies even there? Like, those are longer term, bigger issues that need to be like dug up, examined, and, rebuilt from. But things don't happen in a day, basically.
So when you're talking about the the beauty industry in Australia, and you're saying that there's a hierarchy, what hierarchy is there?
Just like in Canada, just like in the US, like there's absolutely, like, as a brown woman, when I'm in India, obviously I am brown like everybody else. But when I'm a brown woman working in the industry here, I'm the token brown girl, right? So you can absolutely feel the hierarchy of a privileging of white models, white actresses, white people getting jobs in these industries, and getting taken up in these spaces in a much more sort of like, they're the normative framework, right? So as a brown girl, you're othered.
Yeah.
So you're often taken up quite tokenistically. You're kind of taken up as, okay, we need like some diversity in this scene, so let's grab this girl and throw her in the shot. And it's like, you're always like the side chick, or you're always like in the background.
Yeah.
You're not considered for the main lead quite as much. It is changing, but there's a lot of discussion in the acting industry here, as well as like the beauty industry, that we can't to continue to just be like, okay, you can fill like the token role. Come on, man. Like, it's 2020. Like, we're human beings. We're just as much part of your society as like a white person.
Yeah.
So you can't kind of on the one hand say that you're a multicultural society, but then not value people of color in the same way. And especially in Australia, like the conversation around Indigenous people is like a huge thing. Like, this is Indigenous land, So
right. Oh yeah, actually that's a huge and complicated problem, because I'm thinking about the equal employment opportunity laws in the US. right? And so the equal employment opportunity, I have to study a lot of that because of my profession, which is IO psychology. So is industrial and organizational psychology. So it's a lot of like compliance and like basically assessment design and things like that, selection processes design. And they have a clause within the like they have an exception. So everybody is entitled to equal opportunity if it's a larger than if the organization is larger than 15 people. Not without getting too technical, there's a small clause which allows certain kinds of occupations, if it's an occupational requirement to have a certain look, it allows them to discriminate based on look. For example, Hooters, Hooters. They say we need Hooters waitresses. And if you want to be a Hooters waiter, then they're probably going to put you in the back somewhere, right? And that's completely justified because it's a business necessity. And there's this huge conversation in in Hollywood, which is like, can a white man play a black man? Can a black man play a white man? And if not, then like, how are you going to justify that not happening? Because if a black man wants to kind of audition for a white role, would EEO count? And a lot of people have started contesting that notion just because of equal employment opportunity, which is part of the Constitution now.
It's a really fascinating area because, I mean, the thing is, there's historical differences here. Like, for a black man to audition for what might have been a historically white role, like, I think that is a different thing than a white man putting on blackface and stereotyping and playing a black character. I mean, it comes, especially in America, and I'm not an American, but there's a really dark history of like these Jim Crow laws, and it's not even the same way around. It's sort of like the argument that people make that, oh, you know, Indian people wanting to lighten their skin, it's just the same way that like white people want to have a tan. And I've always taken issue with that. I'm like, they're not equivalent. Brown people who want to lighten their skin comes from colonized histories, and lightness is equated to power. It's equated to being better. It's equated to being more intelligent. Like, there's a lot of like emotional baggage attached to that.
Definitely. A lot of classist stuff. Oh, sorry about that.
No, but you're right. There's classism involved as well, and racism involved. When white people want to darken their skin, they're very careful to say they're not blackening their skin. They don't want to be brown or black. It's an aesthetic preference, and it's not as emotionally bound up in things of class and race. I find it very problematic to call them an equal exchange. I don't think they are.
Yeah, I guess I think in their case it's like a signal that they were outdoors. Like, they were outdoors in the summer, and like, it's a signal saying like, I was outdoors, I spent some time there, and then that's why you got the tan.
To go to a Caribbean island and get a tan or something. Like, yeah.
Right. So at the same time though, I feel like a lot of and this is like, again, a few voices from the left have said that like certain levels of cultural appropriation are inappropriate. For example, they consider certain things cultural appropriation, which sometimes I question. For example, they were giving, like, I think Twitter was throwing shade at a white couple that started a Chinese restaurant, and this couple was really passionate about like Chinese food. They went to China, they learned how to make the food and things like that. But they were calling for this restaurant be shut down just because they're like, you don't have the right to make this food, and that was a huge argument.
Yeah, it's a tricky one, isn't it? I mean, where do you fall in the spectrum of like, what is appropriation versus appreciation?
See, like, for example, I was just at a friend's place and he made some curry, man. And I was like, so I walked into his house. I was like, hey, I smell curry, and he was like, ah, and I thought that was funny as hell. It was funny to me, and I, like, based on my relationship with him, I can make, like, he's Russian Ukrainian. I can make Russian Ukrainian jokes. Like, and he can make like Indian jokes to a certain extent. Obviously, like he's obviously not going to be insulting about it. And I think in doing that, like in even like in making fun of each other to a certain extent without it being harmful, without anyone feeling unsafe, I think there's a little bit of merit in that, because you have, how else are you going to learn about what's appropriate and what's not appropriate in a culture if you don't use humor, right? I'll say some shit, I'll be like, oh, I'll say something, and the other person's gonna be like, whoa, hold up, that's too much.
Yeah.
You've taken that a little too far. Just back up a little bit, and then it's all chill. You're like, yeah, I'm gonna back it up.
Yeah.
But I don't agree with canceling someone. Like if you say some shit, like, and you completely cancel that individual, like I just want you wiped off the face of this earth. That's a little. I mean, that's a little too much. What do you think?
No, I completely agree. It's kind of what we talked about at the beginning of this conversation. I kind of feel that calling out culture and cancel culture might come from a place of anger that is warranted to a certain degree. But I think to completely cancel out people who don't know any better, instead of, it's no one's job to educate someone on where they're going wrong. But if you can, and look, this takes infinite patience also. So not everyone is going to be or should be up to this task, but there is something to be said for having a conversation, taking opportunities to check people's privileges and say, hey, you might want to educate yourself in this space because what you're doing is not so cool. If you cancel them out, I think you do risk what I was saying at the beginning of this conversation, of people going off and finding their own tribe where everybody thinks the same way, and other people over here thinking their own way. And you have these separate echo chambers where no one is learning and no one is growing, and like culture as a whole isn't pushing forward. I think you then end up having very polarized groups like the US, where the left and the right, if you can just be so reductive about it, just don't speak to each other at all.
I think it's pretty much reduced to that. It's literally like it's reduced to that. But yeah, if you're just to add to that, so you said like you can ask someone to check their privilege. According to you, like where do you see that kind of playing out? Like where do you see people acting from a place of privilege?
Look, I think everyone has privilege. Like we as brown people have privileges. There's no one in this world who, like, we don't live in a vacuum, and we don't live in a world outside of social constructs. So knowing that we all navigate through these spaces in certain ways, as I was kind of saying just a moment ago, it's no one's job to check someone or tell them what. And I feel very uncomfortable doing that most of the time. I just find it I'm a very conflict, like, averse person. So yeah. I get very uncomfortable doing that. But at the same time, like, you were bringing up the example of your friend. Like, this is a friend of yours who's Russian Ukrainian.
Yeah.
And joke about and talk, but if he says something that bothers you, you can feel safe going to him, hey man, like, that's not really cool. It bothers me in my culture for this, and this reason. Please consider not doing that. Yeah. So that's kind of like how I operate. Like, I go and I would speak up to someone who I feel like would hear it. But if it's outside of that, I don't really feel safe or comfortable or the need to go out of my way to, like, educate, for example, like a really, really ardent Trump supporter. Like, that's not my place, nor do I care to engage in this battle with them. So I don't know, maybe that's me sort of, I don't want to say shirking a responsibility, because I don't think it's my responsibility to educate someone. No, like, it's not their job to tell me what to think either. The world is very, like, it's a pluralistic community of people with different voices and different thoughts. I think I'm kind of like you. It's like, let's have conversations when it's safe to do so. And if not, like, I don't know. I also have, like, my mental health to think about. I don't want to burn out a stressful life thinking about all these things.
Yeah, definitely. Speaking of mental health, I got on Twitter like 3 weeks ago. So I've Yeah, so I mean, I wasn't on Twitter because just generally, like, just the whole word count and everything else, like, it seemed too complicated, and I don't really post. I'm a lurker. Right? Even on Reddit, I'm just a lurker. So,
like you, man, I have a Twitter account. I barely post. I'm just like, it's like watching up from the sidelines, lurking.
And the first guy, I got to admit, the first guy that I followed was Donald Trump. He was the first because he's hilarious on Twitter, man. Like, whatever, you can love him, hate him, whatever. The shit that he posts on Twitter is hilarious. Like, I think his purpose is to entertain. It's not really to lead. And it's definitely working, man. It's really great. So,
if only that entertainment wasn't so harmful to certain groups, you know?
Oh, dude, totally, man. I think now it's getting more and more like corrosive and harmful. Like, it's getting divisive to the extent that it's like I have guys, like I have friends I know who are like moderate. Like most people on the right are like moderate right. They're not really technically, if you're on the far right, you won't believe in government, so you really won't give a shit about the whole system. You'll be like, screw this, I'm going my own way, and we're creating a militia. Like, that's how you would be if you're far right.
Far out, yeah. Like, let's not have any intervention from anybody in my freedom.
So most of these guys they have no way to explain some of the stuff that he said. Like, I think there was this video where I don't want to repeat it here, but basically he said there are some really anti-China ways to address the coronavirus, and the dude was calling that out in one of his rallies, and like there was a whole arena of people just going mad and just going woo, like going crazy about it. And so anyway, I got on Twitter, right, and here's the funny thing: if I look at anyone's comments on Twitter, like I looked at one of so somebody I know is a spokesperson of Congress, right? So, and they keep sending me their tweets. So I was like, okay, let me see. And I looked at that comment section. If you look at anybody, like anybody big, anybody left, right, whoever, and you see the comment section, there's just so much hate. It's almost like these algorithms actually support hateful commentary, and it's a pain to see, man.
Yeah, definitely.
What,
and again, this ties in. Sorry, but I just like want to commend you for kind of creating spaces for conversation, because I just think, like you just said there, like people are so threatened by a viewpoint that opposes their own that like they have this like strong reaction to, you know, be hateful and defensive back. And it's like, is this how you want to go through your life? Like, really? And I mean this on both ends of the argument. Like, what does that achieve? And again, from a mental health perspective, how is this helping you live like a great balanced life? Like, it's, I don't know how we've gotten to this point in human history where we can't even talk to one another. Like, it's actually, I do know how we got to that point, but it's sad. It's really sad that we can't.
Yeah, I think shit is getting pretty polarizing, man, for sure. Was it different in Canada? Was it similar? I know Canada is very left leaning.
I mean, I think if you compare it to the U.S., it's an easy assumption to make. But you know, Canada, like every other country, these things are nuanced, and Canada absolutely has problems with racism and homophobia and a lot of. Absolutely, it's not like the land of like perfect politeness as much as that's its public image.
Yeah,
Canada, like, I will say, I'm very happy that my family immigrated to Canada, and that's where I got to grow up, and I love Canada. But, you know, Canada, like the United States, like Australia, is built on it's a settler colony, so it's got genocidal histories as to how it became that it is. That's never something that's been completely reconciled or addressed. And then to build off the back of that, you know, immigrants in Canada, for example, we are still living on colonized land. We have to recognize that. Like, it's part of an ongoing history of oppression. So I don't know, like, I feel like I was lucky growing up in Canada. Like, I went to university in Toronto. Toronto is an incredibly diverse city.
Yeah.
The level of discourse around these kinds of things. Again, Toronto has its problems, but I was lucky enough to be in spaces or be in a university where you could have very nuanced conversation around these things.
Yeah.
given what's been going on recently, like there's been a lot of pushback against the BLM protests in Toronto, or, people speaking up against these things. You get resistance in Canada, absolutely. Maybe not to the same volume or extent as the US, because it's a smaller population.
Yeah.
Canada is about 35 million people, and America is what, 300 million? Like, it's significantly bigger. But Canadian racism, for example, is a lot more polite. It's a lot more sort of insidious and like hidden, and like, it's.
I have another friend in. I have another friend in Canada. I think she's on the East Coast and on the West Coast, and she said, and she tells me similar things. How so? How is it insidious and kind of polite?
It's a lot more like. I think when people think of racism, they think of overt forms of racism, people calling you a name or attacking you violently. When someone asks you, where are you from? Where are you really from? Or, oh, you're pretty for a brown girl. Like those little things, those microaggressions are very much based on the same problematic culture of othering people who don't happen to look like you. It comes from a space of understanding one race as somehow better than the rest, and you get that in Canada a lot.
Oh shit! Did you get that though?
Yeah, absolutely.
Dude, that's messed up, man. That sucks. Yeah, I think
because you've come to the US. When did you move to the US?
A couple of years back.
And how have you found that experience as an Indian man coming to the US?
I actually think like I was pleasantly surprised by just the level of acceptance that both US and the Canada has been able to achieve in terms of living with diversity. Yeah. India does live with diversity, yes, 100%. We are very diverse, but at the same time, we haven't dealt with international diversity. That's something we struggle with. So much so that we haven't been able to kind of integrate the Northeast with the mainland. And a lot of it is because, people from the Northeast look and have different customs than people in the mainland. But again, I'm digressing. Just to answer your question, I was pleasantly surprised. I've maybe had like one or two experiences which are weird, but I wouldn't count them as anything. I wouldn't say like, again, I have a very high bar for what constitutes racism. Like at a personal level, like I'm like my bar for racism is if someone identifies my race and then restricts my access to opportunity. To me, that is an example of being racist, right? If someone is like confused or like gives me, like supposing if I'm walking down the street, someone decides to walk on the other side, some shit like that. It's happened a couple of times because again, not a lot of people walking in North America. Roads are lonely, things like that. So I understand. I'm not gonna make a big deal out of it. Has happened a couple of times. I'm gonna be like, yeah, fine. You be safe, I'll be safe. What I would be bothered by is like examples of overt discrimination. But I think some of these things I've gotten as well. Like you speak English really well for an Indian. Dude, I think this was pretty funny. This is funny because again, I later got to know who the professor is, and he is an amazing guy. But one of my statistics professors, like I was sitting in the back of his class, and I was learning statistics, and I'm doing psychology, right? This is a class for psychologists. He takes everyone's intro. He goes one by one, boom, 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 boom. It's like, oh, are you doing IT? And I was like, bro, what the fuck are you talking about?
Could you be more cliched?
Yeah, I was like, holy shit, man. But I mean, now looking back at who this guy is, I appreciate it. But at that moment, I was like, what the
What was your reaction in the moment? Like,
in the moment, I was like, what the fuck?
Like, how did you say that to him? Or like, what did you...
I was like, no, I was stunned. I was like, hey, no, man. Like, I was like, no. But it took me time to process, right? They like when you're with people who are from different backgrounds, you're as alien to them as they are to you. You know what I'm saying? So I may have made certain assumptions about the way he lives, and he some certain assumptions about the way I operate. So, but having that assumption revealed to you may not be a pleasant experience. I mean, it wasn't a pleasant experience for me, but definitely, like having that revealed to me was weird for sure.
You put that very nicely. Having these truths that are outside of your own experience revealed to you takes a minute to process and understand. And it's I think, I don't know, I've heard it in the press at the moment what we're going through being called like a great awakening or a great reckoning. And there's a lot of different narratives sort of bumping up against each other and people trying to understand things for the first time that they haven't ever had to stop and think about before.
Yeah.
So it's quite amazing to sort of witness, and God knows how it's going to be digested, but time will tell.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's happening. Funny enough, it's happening in India as well, man.
I wanted to ask about this. Yeah. Like, can I ask, like, what are your thoughts on how BLM specifically is being kind of received and taken up within India? Is it being taken up?
I don't think it is, for the simple reason that Indians really don't have an experience of racism based on skin color. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, in terms of they don't have a group persecuted because of the way they look. Now we have the class system, which is really fucked up, and the class system, the people who are in the lower, like, who not, I don't want to use the word low, I want to say the people who are bearing the, like, who are on the wrong side of the class system are the people who do not have access to this information, so they cannot really convert that into a movement. Like, but what had actually kind of played itself out into a movement was the Me Too movement. And
right.
And there was also recently there was a little bit. I would love to get your thoughts on this. Right. So, what were you there for the? Were you following the whole boys' locker room thing?
I mean, like when it first came out of America, like boys being boys and having locker room talk.
Right, and then there was an Indian version of it where there was like this. Okay, so just to give you some context, it's there was this group of dudes who were commenting on and sharing photos of, allegedly, it wasn't proven to be true, but the notion was that there were some dudes who were sharing private photos of women that was sent to them by the women. Right.
So sent in confidence.
Sent in confidence, and they were kind of just distributing that over a group. And they made there was a little bit of a hoo-ha about it, and they later found out that the person who was kind of like the instigator was actually a girl who was trying to undermine the group or something like that. Like, basically, it turned out weird.
Sounds like a teen drama.
It does. Twilight.
Gossip Girl, or Twilight or something.
But what came out of that was this whole conversation of how to proceed when you've shared private photos of yourself to other people. Right. And what I see as a positive there is definitely the fact that people are having that conversation in the first place.
Yeah.
Like, imagine having that imagine 10 years ago. Like, we probably would, like, all, like, I don't know how old you were in New Delhi when you were in New Delhi, but I
was a baby.
All right. So, but imagine just that level of repression, like, just 10 years ago. And now we're having like, now people are talking about, like, nude sharing etiquette, basically.
Yeah.
And to me, that's a good conversation to have. I mean, it's a shitty way to kind of expose itself, but I'm sure like these are certain conversations that a lot of people who are living in slightly less restricted socio-sexual environments kind of operate with.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. I think the types of conversations that we're having, whether it's about nude photo sharing etiquette or race or homophobia or like, I think generally speaking, globally, we live in the information age, and there's so much access to information, and there's so many platforms to share your thoughts and have conversations. I mean, 10 years ago, how could we have done this? Sat here in different countries, had a chat, and then shared it with an audience. Like, we just live in a very unique time, and I think it's allowed for a much more rapid progression when it comes to conversations that maybe were kept very repressed for a very long time. Like, I can't think of like my parents' generation, for example, even talking about mental health, let alone dating and like nude photo sharing etiquette. Like, that's not a conversation that generation would have had. So I think it's quite amazing to bear witness to how quickly these things are changing. I mean, look at BLM, for example, just to go back to that as something that's happening right now. The conversations it's generated in the last month, I think, have been bigger and have moved the needle on the issue, arguably, more than it has in the last maybe 10 years or something like that. And that's just because of, I think of the particular technologies we have access to and media, and it's crazy.
Did you experience any powerful conversation in particular?
Around BLM? Oh my gosh, lots and lots. Like, this is, it's a space that this is what I studied in school. So I went to York University in Toronto, and like my background was actually in political science. Like, I looked at South Asian politics a lot. I'm like, I want to know about the motherland. I want to know about India. But that was my undergrad. And then in grad school, I was in a program called socio-legal studies. So it was like interdisciplinary sort of undertaking between the law school and the sociology department.
Right.
So, I looked a lot at like critical thought constructs, and critical race and gender work were kind of very much a part of what I studied to write my thesis. And I followed BLM right from the beginning when it first started up, but to see it being taken up in these really sort of passionate ways right around the world. Weird. It's made me like connect back to what I studied in a way that I never thought would be possible, because I had this academic background, and then I ended up being like a makeup artist and then like working in film. Like, it felt completely disconnected. But I feel like this strange moment where the two things are kind of having a moment to speak to each other. So
definitely,
your question about having powerful conversations around this, all of a sudden in Australia, like, I am in the Actors Union here. I do work with some makeup brands, like as a beauty blogger. I've been able to have that conversation directly with them. Obviously I'm not a Black woman, and Australia has a different relationship with the Black community. Here it's what's happening with Indigenous people in custody and Indigenous realities. It's very different. There's a very small African diaspora here.
Got it.
But there is a wider...
As a side note, sorry, just to kind of get the terminology right. Are we not using Aborigines anymore?
It's a great question. In North America, in Canada, we don't say Aboriginal. We say First Nation people.
First Nation.
Australia, they do say Aboriginal. So I don't really know the histories behind that, but I know that that's what is widely said.
Got it.
And it's interesting, actually. I was having this conversation with someone a few days ago. First Nations as a term has been kind of adopted from Canada. And people are using it here, but I don't see it being used as widely as Aboriginal. So, good question.
And that's an issue.
I don't know. I don't know how people feel about this. But yeah, like it's just been interesting to see how these things have translated to fit local contexts. And so to go back to powerful conversations in this area, I've gone, okay, look, I'm one person. Like I can't take on the entire system or anything like that, but I do have some level of expertise in this area. And what are my lanes? My lanes are acting and beauty. So let me bring this conversation up within the circles that I'm connected to. I have a bit of a platform. Let me reach out to brands. And so I've started reaching out to brands. I've started to reach out to my union and start asking bigger questions about, well, what are you doing for diversity and inclusion in these spaces? How has BLM impacted you? And oh man, it's without getting too into detail. Like I've had a couple of really powerful conversations with CEOs of companies, like big unions here. Things are evolving. I don't know how it'll fully play out. And again, I am one woman in a sea of voices. I'm not a Black woman. I'm not an Indigenous woman. I'm just one woman of color who has a particular experience, and I want to share that back. I'm surprised people have listened. Whether they'll act on what I'm saying, it's not for me to. It's just for me to wait and see.
So when you say you want people to act on the stuff that you're talking about, what do you expect them? What's the solution according to you?
Like, for example, a lot of brands, almost just about a month ago now, on June 2nd, they shared their little BLM tile on like Instagram. Like all of these brands started performing their, I shouldn't say performing with such sarcasm, but they started publicly declaring their allegiance to this cause, right? But now here we are a month later. What have you actually done to further the positions that people of color have within your company? Or what have you done to further invite them into your brands or represent them at your brands? So for me, it's not a simple question of just being like, as a beauty influencer, an immediate thing that comes to mind is, okay, how many influencers of color or Black or Indigenous women are you using in your campaigns? That's an easy visual reference to see, like, how much are they engaging with these communities? But for me, that's not enough. That's just very surface level. So what? You hired a couple of models to be in your next campaign. But does that had a cultural shift at your company? Who are the people at the decision-making tables at your company who choose those campaigns? What are you doing for hiring people of color at your company? What are you doing for education? Like, one thing I found working in the Australian beauty industry was a lot of people aren't trained on how to match foundation for darker skins.
Yeah.
Like, just they don't know, they get freaked out, and they back away from it.
Isn't that a huge problem? Like, because like I'm assuming like professional makeup is different than like it's like it's not the same as just like putting on lipstick or whatever people put on in front of me. I'm sorry, I'm being very ignorant here. But I have no idea as to like basically I'm just assuming that doing makeup at home is different than doing makeup in like a studio.
It is. You're right in that assumption, because when you're doing makeup for television or film, like it's very different. You have HD cameras on you, or sometimes it has to be appropriate to what context you're in a scene, or if it's a period drama, for example, it's going to look different. And this is something that you hear over and over again from women of color, particularly Black women in America, for example. Actors and models will go onto sets, and the makeup artist there won't know how to groom their hair, won't know how to match their foundation, won't know how to do things to get them ready. And so that labor often falls back on the Black woman to do it herself or come prepared with her own foundations. But that's not an expectation that's put on white people, because people are trained on how to do white people's makeup. So there's these little schisms that exist on every level. And
and who's to say, like, even if the look, like, even if you have a professional, like, they're going to give you a look based on norm, right? I'm just guessing. If they have, like, if you're giving someone a look, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, that's really complicated, I'm assuming. For example, if you have, like, you can give someone who has, like, for example, brown skin.
Yeah.
That has its own cultural representations as well. So you probably can't. So dressing them up in regular Western clothing, like regular quintessential clothing, may not fit the character, but at the same time, you can't caricaturize the individual as well. Like, you can't
so like totally.
And like, is there like an issue with look as well in general? Like,
it is. I mean, like it's an interesting conversation I was starting to have with the actors union here in Australia. Like, for example, there has been a lot of talk about how if you are employing, let's say, an Indian actor in a scene, and you're expecting them to act as an Indian person in the scene, not you're expecting them to act according to their own cultural background. Often the white writers, the white directors, the white people in the scene with them don't know about that. So the expectation of teaching goes back on that actor to educate everybody on set that I'm doing the accent correctly, or I'm behaving in this way because it's appropriate to my culture, blah, 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 blah. They end up doing so much more work than just being an actor or having a certain look or carrying themselves a certain way. So the union here has now started talking about compensating actors of color for doing that extra work.
Right.
It's getting, and I think the same thing is that conversation is extending to makeup artists, for example. Why aren't anyone who's coming out of a makeup academy here, why aren't you trained to do darker skin tones or do curly hair or do things that are outside of, one particular look?
Right.
And I'm really glad that these conversations are happening.
Yeah.
They need to be happening.
And I guess it must be complicated to when the rubber hits the road, right? Because even if you have someone who's going to probably be able to, supposing you have someone with that skill set.
Yeah.
I think there's a limit on how often that skill set will be used.
You mean if someone is trained to do Afro hair, for example, not every model they're going to get is a Afro haired model? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, because the majority of, I'm guessing the majority of the people, the majority of the models they get are of a certain kind of background.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think what happens is that because there isn't kind of training and conversation in this space, it then ends up feeding back into a system where they go, let's just actually not hire any African models because we don't training. It's harder. Let's just and so it perpetuates a system where you leave it out. So I think it's important to, you talked about opportunities, right?
Right.
So we need to take these systemic barriers out of the way so those opportunities then can exist more evenly for diverse groups of people.
Yeah, that makes sense, because one thing which I've definitely noticed in the model is to the model and actor kind of schema is that there's more actors out there and there's more talent out there than is opportunity. That's just the way the industry is designed across. Anywhere you go, there'll be 100 people who'll want that.
Yeah.
And it's something which is really weird to me, because you're talking about unions. I'm so surprised that the Indian actor, how you have a Screen Actors Guild with reference to India, we don't have that.
No, I was going to ask. I've never come across a union as such.
They have a guild, but in essence, it's not as for example, my friend was telling me that supposing in the States, if you're going to get paid a certain X amount for working till 7 p.m. Even if they have you there till 7:05.
Yes, you'll get paid overtime.
And the overtime is usually double of your fee. So it's supposing you're getting 5K a day, you'll get 15K for that day.
Totally.
And it's very fair.
Yeah.
But for some reason, in the Indian context, that's not happened. And that's going to be a problem. It's weird because a lot of actors that I know, they are motivated by something which is just different than money. They want to create a following. Some of them want attention. Some of them want recognition. And it seems to me that sometimes supersedes their need for money. And it's almost like the industry is actually exploiting that need.
It totally is. Oh my gosh. It's a huge problem in Bollywood. People, there's now an expectation because of that, let's call it a desperation, if you will.
Yeah.
People there's so much competition and people want to get in front of that camera no matter what. They are willing to do that work for free. Sometimes they're willing to pay to get a role. So it's kind of gone a couple of movies for free.
Yeah.
You don't need a thing as an actor. You do it just to get the exposure, and then you and I'm what? How am I supposed to pay my bills? How am I supposed to live? That is, maybe it's me being naive as a Canadian coming in from the outside, but I'm I can't
That's not
this.
naive at all. I think you should get, like, I think it's a hallmark of a fair society if you get paid for what the work that you put in, right? Simple up, straight up.
But honestly, Shivam, like I've had those conversations sometimes with like people in the industry, and the amount of resistance and pushback you get, you start feeling crazy because they're just like, no, 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 of course you do this work for free, and then you get a platform, and then you can demand money. And I'm like, how am I supposed to survive? Bombay is not a cheap city, number
Not at
one.
all.
Two, this is work you're asking me to do. Like
Yeah.
these are 20-hour days on a set, learning lines, getting into a character, like doing all of these things. To do all of that for free, because that's going to somehow benefit me down the line. I mean, this is why I think I'm now outside of India, and I'm not 100% sure. I don't know. I'm working it out. It's a process, but I'm not entirely convinced I'd be going back because I don't see even financially viable for me to do that.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm sure there's like a lot of great talented people like you that are kind of moving away from the industry just because of this bullshit.
Yeah.
I mean,
in other industries, is that expected of people? That they just work for free to get started?
Yeah, I mean, in certain cases, yes. So, but here's the thing. Like, for example, like you're supposed, like unpaid internships is a thing.
Yeah, you're right.
But it's not years and years of it. Like, in terms of, I am assured success. Like, it's stable. Like, I am assured success if I put in a certain X amount of work.
Sure.
But that's not the case in acting. Like, it's not like, yeah, you grind and then by the end of it, you'll be there.
There's no guarantee.
There's no guarantee. And like for women, it's a little bit more complicated because, at least in my opinion, because young actresses, it seems, are constantly coming up. And the average age or the span within which someone is prolific or is hired a lot is narrower for women than it is for men.
Oh, definitely.
Guy like Salman Khan, he can go on and on, right? But there are a few, despite the whole like rolling, like driving over people, that shit pisses me off. He basically, but that's beside the point. Yeah, but to the larger point of, it's a little bit more complicated if you're a woman and if you're looking for an acting job, because there's a certain age after which essentially it becomes significantly harder to get certain levels of employment.
Totally. And it's the case in Hollywood as well, that those conversations have been happening for a long time, that women's shelf life in this industry it's a lot shorter, and it's a lot more, unfortunately, based, your value is your look in a much more disproportional way than your talent,
Yeah.
And I think in India that's amplified. So it's a real tricky bind to be in, because, and look, the same, by the way, applies to the beauty industry, and it applies to the modeling industry. It becomes so tough to understand your value or recognize that you as an artist have something inherent to you that is beyond what your hair looks like or your face looks like.
Yeah,
it's always tied back to that, and I that it's something that it's an ugly truth of this industry. Like, I am aware that I have been able to do certain jobs because of the way I look. And it wouldn't have been possible otherwise. That's a privilege that I have. But then at the same time, I also know that that doesn't affect men in the same way. Men, as you said, can have long careers in this space. It certainly helps if you're a good-looking guy, but then at the same time, not the only thing that sort of limits you necessarily.
Yeah, I mean, if you have like 15 years to do something, like say for instance, if I'm a guy, I start at 20, right? And I say I want to be an actor. I say I'm gonna spend, like, I know people who've said I'm gonna spend 6 years doing this or 7 years doing this. By the end of 7 years, they're actually like good actors. But if you're in a situation where you're saying, okay, I want to be an actor at the age of 20 and you're a woman, you're going to also be thinking about the fact that by the time you're 30 or 32, and I'm being generous here, you're probably going to say, like, I'm not. and like I'm not going to be able to be as successful after that.
It's also sort of bound up in societal expectations that a woman by age is going to get married, childbearing years, all of these things about societal milestones that are put on women. Like if you don't do these things, then you're somehow not a successful woman. And it's so complicated. And this applies, we're talking about the acting and modeling industry, but these are pressures that are put on women across the board, no matter what your job is. So, we live in gendered realities, and these are the differences in what affect the decisions that people are able to make.
Yeah.
And is it unfair? Absolutely. But the fact, again, that we're having conversations about this, I take as a good step in some regards, because I'm not even sure these would have been conversations maybe in our parents' generation, for example.
Yeah, definitely not. Like, I know that, like, if you were a female actor in that era, like, you were viewed very differently and things like that. Like, that was pretty bad. Also, I understand that we've gone over an hour. So
I knew this would happen. We said we were chatty, and we're definitely chatty, but we covered a lot of ground.
Yeah, we did. So we could tell me how you're feeling right now.
Well, actually, funny enough, I have a phone call with Davey in about 8 minutes, so
Sounds
I do
good.
have to wrap it up. So
I will. So let's drop off. But thank you so much for taking the time out to do this. It was a lot of fun for me, and I'm so thank you so much. And I'm just gonna stop.